I hate seeing people get away with stuff. And I like figuring stuff out. My name is Ian Icavello, and I was the lead detective in the Sarah Harris case. Sarah Harris, she was incredibly bright.
One should always pursue knowledge, no matter the topic.
Very energetic, very fun.
Did Sarah have any idea how beautiful she was?
Honestly, I don't think she did.
Sarah Jane Harris. Sarah hopes to become an anesthesiologist.
She was shocked that she won the Miss Maryland Petite pageant. She had thought from a very young age that she would want to be a doctor. She wanted to help people. In 2020, Sarah needed wisdom teeth pulled.
She initially met James Ryan as a patient at his oral surgery practice.
I'm James Ryan. I mean, it's not just that we say that we care, but we really do. We take pride.
Dr. James Ryan was a well-respected oral surgeon. A lot of people knew him and thought very highly of him.
So she gets the teeth done. She starts getting all these text messages, and they're from Dr. Ryan. And then he says, by the way, I'm looking to hire someone as a surgical assistant. Do you know anyone? She says something like, well, what about me, Mom? And he offered her the job.
She then became an employee, and then his girlfriend and his live-in girlfriend.
Sarah's life appeared glamorous on the outside, but behind closed doors, I mean, that wasn't necessarily the case.
I would have never, ever thought that her life would end the way it did.
Montgomery County 911.
My girlfriend, I think, overdosed. I'm trying to resuscitate her right now.
And what is your first and last name?
James Ryan. I'm doing chest compressions.
And is she breathing?
She's not breathing.
When the two responding officers got to the house, they saw Sarah. She's laying on the floor.
What did authorities think had happened to Sarah that day?
She overdosed.
And we don't know if it's an accident, if it's suicide, or if it's a homicide.
The decision was made to charge him with depraved heart murder.
I think most of our audience will have never heard of depraved heart murder.
I have never seen it before.
You have to show an extreme indifference to human life.
James Ryan provided those drugs that caused her death.
That doesn't mean he's guilty of murder. Another way of presenting this case would be he never intended to hurt her.
I knew this was not just some simple accidental overdose. This was much more.
Was she sleeping on the couch last night?
Yeah, she would do that sometimes.
It's the morning of January 26, 2022. Sarah Harris lies unresponsive on the floor of the room in disarray. Her boyfriend, Dr. James Ryan, tearfully talks with police at the scene. The conversation is recorded on a body camera as they ask him about the night before.
We're watching TV, and then she said you should probably go to bed because you're tired and you have to work tomorrow, so I did.
What time did you go to bed?
Probably about 10 or 11.
Ryan has already told authorities he's a doctor and that he thinks it's an overdose. And he says it's happened before.
And I did CPR and brought her back.
This time, Sarah doesn't survive. Dr. Ryan has suggested where she got at least one of her drugs of choice, a powerful anesthetic.
She used to take propofol too. She used to steal that from my office.
How they got into her body?
I've caught her before with, like injecting herself with things.
And why?
She was bipolar also, so she could be really angry or could be really happy.
Ryan had called Sarah's family with the awful news that morning. But her mother, Tina, just didn't believe anything he said. She immediately suspected James Ryan was responsible for Sarah's death. She arrived at the scene about 20 minutes later.
I started kicking and hitting him and screaming at him.
What did he say happened?
He said he went to bed and left her alone and came down, and she was unresponsive in the morning.
Authorities say they found wrappers from syringes, tourniquets, and saline bags next to the kitchen sink, and drug vials in Sarah's purse. Tina thinks Ryan arranged it that way.
He wanted to look like it was a suicide.
Tina had long held suspicions about Dr. Ryan. He had encountered Sarah Harris more than a year earlier, not as a girlfriend, but as a patient, to get her wisdom teeth out.
Dr. Ryan is somebody who's practiced for over 20 years. He has incredible credentials.
Mary Fulginiti is a former prosecutor and defense attorney and a CBS News consultant. We asked her to use her decades of courtroom experience to help analyze this case.
He's esteemed and regarded in his community as one of the best at what he does.
Tina Harris says the first time her daughter met Dr. Ryan for her teeth in the summer of 2020, the doctor was professional. But she does remember at the time feeling it was curious when his interest in Sarah seemed to change.
She starts getting all these text messages. He asks her, "How are you doing?" And she says, "I'm fine." And he starts sending little emojis.
What are you thinking as her mom?
I thought it was a little bizarre that he added a little happy face, and I thought, well, maybe he just likes using emojis.
She says that's when Ryan had mentioned he was looking to hire someone as a surgical assistant.
I thought, well, maybe he just thinks that she'd really be a good addition.
Dr. Ryan hardly seemed like a threat. He was divorced with 3 grown children and was involved with a woman with whom he already had a baby. At 47, he was more than twice Sarah's age.
He said, "No, I don't need your resume. Just come on in for a working interview." I said, "Well, I'm proud of you, honey. That's pretty incredible. He's going to teach you all this stuff?"
At the beginning, Sarah seemed to love the job, but Tina says as the holidays approached, an extravagant gift re-triggered her suspicion that Dr. Ryan's interest in Sarah was more than professional.
What was it?
A diamond necklace.
That's quite a gift.
I said, "Okay, he's after you." I said, "You got to put your foot down."
Instead, in early 2021, she says Sarah announced she had agreed to go out for a meal with Ryan, who was ending his other relationship. He seemed to win over Sarah, and Tina admits in their early days as a couple, even she found him impressive.
As a mother, was a part of you excited she was dating a doctor?
Well, I was excited. I was excited because he had a wonderful reputation.
And she says Ryan was generous. He would lease Sarah a new car and take her and her family on trips, all expenses paid. Tina says, in a way, he spent time courting her, too.
He would say, "I would love to have you as my mom. Sarah's so blessed to have you."
Tina says she and Sarah always had a special bond.
We were very, very close.
She says Sarah was close to her 3 siblings, too, especially older sister Rachel.
Rachel took it upon herself that she was going to be the protector.
But there had been a rough period during Sarah's youth in suburban Maryland. Like many young people, she experimented with drugs and had problems moderating her mood. She suffered from anxiety.
When did she first struggle with depression?
I noticed depression coming about when she was about 14, 15 years old. She would start feeling down.
But Tina says Sarah still excelled in high school, craving knowledge and the skills that came with it.
It's currently hanging in the Louvre in Paris.
She learned German, Spanish, Russian, and sign language.
Happy birthday to you.
She put a lot of pressure on herself, especially with her grades.
Before long, Sarah got her social bearings.
She fell into a great group of kids. They would sit out in the living room, play the guitar, play the piano, sing.
She was at a music festival in 2018 when 21-year-old Sarah caught the eye of Henry Peterson, 7 years older.
I feel like it was like stars colliding and meeting someone like you're supposed to meet.
They lived 7 hours apart, but he says they quickly became emotionally inseparable.
We talked about everything you could think of in terms of future marriage and children and family.
He says the distance eventually made them drift. Peterson broke it off, though he says he still imagined they would end up together.
She and I never stopped talking. The love was always there.
By her mid-20s, Sarah had gotten into modeling and competing in beauty pageants. And in 2020, she'd won that Miss Maryland Petite pageant. The next year is when she started quietly seeing Dr. Ryan. And by that summer, they had decided to live together.
And that's when everything goes downhill.
By the end of the summer of 2021, Tina Harris says James Ryan was dominating Sarah's life. Boss, boyfriend, even letting her live rent-free in his house. But instead of flourishing, Sarah seemed anxious and depressed. She saw a psychiatrist who gave her that bipolar diagnosis.
Her complexion starts to change. She starts to lose weight.
On a family trip to Key West that September, Tina says Sarah had been asleep when a drunk Dr. Ryan revealed something unsettling. He had first noticed Sarah in the park when she was just 14.
I used to see Sarah walking the neighborhood and playing at the park with her friends. And he says, then I found out she worked in the toy store, so I would take my kids there so I could see her. And I remember when she dressed up as Elsa from Frozen, and she looked just like Elsa. And then he said, yeah, and then I found out she worked at one of these restaurants, and so I would go in there for dinner so I could get her as my server.
It sounds like Dr. Ryan was obsessed with Sarah.
He was. He was very much so.
By their next trip to Florida a month later, she says Sarah was acting strangely. She wore a bulky, long-sleeve sweatshirt despite the heat, and it seemed like she and Ryan were always fighting.
And she goes, I hate him. I don't want to be here. I want to go home.
And when they returned to Maryland, Tina saw the full, horrifying picture of what Sarah's life had become. She says she called Sarah on October 28th, 2021.
Phone rang. She finally picked up. She could barely talk. Her words were extremely slurred. So I said, Sarah, what's going on? What's wrong with you? She goes, oh, I'm just really tired, Mom.
You knew something was wrong.
Yeah, well, I knew she was slurring.
Tina says she and Rachel left for Sarah's house minutes later.
And we walked into hell.
What did you see?
Well, Sarah answers the door. She smells. It looks like she hadn't bathed in a week or more. She looked horrible.
She'd weighed 120 when she'd had oral surgery with Ryan, Tina says, but Sarah was skin and bones now. And Tina says there was more.
The IV bags, needles laying all over the floor, syringes, tourniquets, bloody footprints, bloody paper towels.
And there were drugs, bottles and vials everywhere. Rachel gathered them up and photographed them.
I never looked at the drugs, and I wish I had.
I do think some people watching would think, how did you not look at what the drugs were?
Of course. I just wanted to get her out.
She says Sarah had offered an innocent, if unconvincing, explanation.
She goes, I've just been dehydrated, Mom. He's just hydrating me. I said, I'm turning him in. And Sarah starts crying, Mom, you can't do that. Please don't do that. She's begging me. I grabbed her arms and I pulled her sleeves up, and she had needle marks from here to here, all over her arms, bruises. I became hysterical.
Against her better judgment, Tina agreed to hold off on calling authorities, but she says she insisted Sarah move back home. Just days later, Tina says Ryan convinced Sarah to come back to him. In the following weeks, Tina says Sarah seemed to be getting better. She started cooking, eating, even going to church. But on December 3rd, 2021, Tina says her daughter answered the phone slurring again. Rachel Harris jumped into action.
Rachel said, I'm going to go and check on her.
When Rachel got there,
it was worse than the first time.
Poking around the ground floor, Rachel once again pulled out her camera, finding drug bottles and vials, as well as a saline bag, an IV pole, IV needles, and bloody footprints on a kitchen mat. She was so distraught she left without talking to her sister. A few days later, Tina confronted Dr. James Ryan. She was in no mood for another explanation.
I just reached across and smacked the living crap out of him.
You hit him?
Yeah. Oh, I hit him. And I said, what are you doing? Are you trying to kill my daughter?
Tina says Ryan still insisted he'd only been hydrating her.
And you still believed it?
I believed he was giving her something. I didn't know what it was. I did not look at the vases. All I could see was my daughter and what kind of trouble she was in.
But the next day, she says Ryan admitted he'd been doing more than hydrating her. He'd been giving Sarah drugs, though only to keep her from getting them someplace else.
So I told him, I said, look, you can break it off with my daughter or I'm calling the police. And he said, well, I'll break it off with her.
But days turned into weeks and Dr. Ryan never did. After months of tension, Tina says she couldn't keep arguing with her daughter anymore.
What was I going to do? Lock her up?
You probably wanted to.
I threatened it. And she said, if you do that, Mom, when I get out, you'll never hear from me again. And that scared me to death.
Within weeks, there was a new tragedy for the Harris family. Sarah's brother Christopher, just 38, died after a heart attack in Montana.
I had to sign the papers to take him off life support, which no mother should have to do.
His death was devastating to the whole family. Sarah posted this tribute message to her brother. Never goodbye. I'll see you soon, big bro. And only 18 days after Christopher's death, at about 8:30 a.m. on January 26, 2022, Tina says she and Rachel were together when Rachel got James Ryan's call.
Rachel started screaming. She's holding the phone, and James has it on FaceTime, and he's got the camera pointed at my baby. Had Sarah on the ground, saying she's gone, she's gone.
At the time of her death, Sarah Harris weighed just 83 pounds. Authorities would list her manner of death as undetermined. Dr. Ryan was not arrested. They seemed to accept his story that Sarah, struggling with mental health issues, had overdosed. But there would be help from a most unlikely investigator.
Rachel started trying to get into Sarah's iCloud.
I just hope that you're happy that I'm with someone who truly, truly loves me.
3 months before she died, Sarah left a voicemail for her ex-boyfriend, Henry Peterson.
I've never trusted anybody as much as I've trusted the man that I'm with right now. Professionally, emotionally. You never let me in that way.
They'd stayed in touch after breaking up, so when she didn't answer her phone after January of 2022, Peterson says he had a strange feeling and decided to go online.
I Googled her name and there's an obituary.
He says when Tina gave him details, he joined her in the belief that James Ryan, the man Sarah said she had trusted more than anybody else, was responsible for her death. But first responders didn't think so.
They didn't shut it down as a crime scene.
Police seized some drug vials, but left the house unguarded. Tina says that's because they believed what Dr. Ryan had told them about where she'd gotten the drugs and how she'd taken them.
It was an overdose.
But she says she knew there was more to it than that, though she didn't know how to prove it. Turns out there was someone very close to her who did.
Rachel told me she would find the evidence.
Rachel Harris decided to examine Sarah's laptop to see if it might contain clues authorities hadn't seen. She didn't know the password, but she knew her sister well.
It took her about a couple of days to figure out Sarah's password.
Combing through Sarah's computer and iCloud, Rachel hit pay dirt, a trove of texts between her sister and James Ryan. The messages were full of references to drugs, including a tranquilizer named diazepam and 2 fast-acting surgical anesthetics, the type Rachel had seen in the home Dr. Ryan and Sarah shared, propofol and ketamine, which is sometimes also used for depression. Rachel created a binder, adding the photos she'd taken there.
Rachel compiled 200 pages of evidence.
The medical examiner would release Sarah's autopsy report, which showed those same 3 drugs in Sarah's system. Research suggests they can all be habit-forming, and they can suppress breathing. Taking them in combination can be lethal.
All the while, Rachel's building a case.
Yes.
In February 2022, Rachel gave her binder to Montgomery County Police. It eventually landed on the desk of Detective Ian Icavello, an expert in pharmaceutical investigations. After more than 33 years as a cop, Icavello was nearing retirement. He decided to come in alone on a Sunday.
It was my birthday, and nothing was going on. You don't get parties when you're this age. I'm like, I'm just gonna go in the office and look through this binder and just see.
What Icavello saw in Rachel's binder suggested cops at the scene had been wrong about Sarah's death. He says reading the text between Sarah and James Ryan was like watching a murder in slow motion.
You could see Sarah die.
Sarah is suffering within the first month of their relationship.
She had anxiety. She was having trouble sleeping.
Ryan offers a quick fix. I can give you an injection. The anxiety will be completely gone in 6 seconds, he writes. It will work. Let's try it.
He had already made the decision.
Icavello says the text suggests that over the months, Sarah developed a drug habit and a habit of asking her boyfriend, the doctor, to feed it. In October 2021, do we have ketamine here? In November, we need syringes. I feel like in December, I just really need sleep, she writes. Can you bring propofol?
She's actively asking for drugs. At no point does he say no.
Icavello says the text suggests Dr. Ryan often brought Sarah the dangerous drugs and that he actually administered at least one about a month before her death. It was December 20th, 2021. If you wake up, I just went to change after I gave you ketamine just now, he writes.
He's injecting her while she's asleep. No monitoring, no anything.
And Icavello points to this exchange from the day before Sarah died. Is it possible to bring home ketamine when you come? She asks. Yes, I will bring some home. I love you, baby, Ryan replies.
The texts tell a story.
They do.
So do Rachel's photos from Sarah's house, says Icavello. though his colleagues lacking experience in pharmaceutical investigations might not have understood that.
They had no idea what they were really looking at.
He says patrol cops and paramedics often deal with overdoses of street drugs like heroin and fentanyl, but the deadly drugs in Sarah Harris's house were masquerading as something else.
There's a difference between drugs and medication.
Iacovello says to the untrained eye, the drugs at Sarah's look like medication. The paraphernalia around the house might have been confusing too.
Usually what we see is burnt spoons, tinfoil, some hypodermic needles, maybe a shoelace or some other string, that kind of drug paraphernalia.
But to Iacovello, the syringes and the saline, the professional tourniquets, and the plastic wrappers at Sarah's made it resemble an operating room.
That's what a lot of it looked like.
Whatever questions responding authorities may have had, he says Dr. Ryan offered answers.
And you've got James saying she did all of this without any other information. Okay, well, we're just kind of going to go with what he says.
He's a doctor.
He's a doctor.
But Iacovello says after reading through the family's binder, any credibility Dr. Ryan may have had that day vanished. And on March 22, 2022, nearly 2 months after Sarah's death, James Ryan was arrested for the murder of Sarah Harris. But prosecutors would have to make the case to a jury.
Sometimes it's hard to convince them.
Maybe especially so in this case, because James Ryan's defense is suggesting he was only trying to save Sarah's life and that she had other ideas.
What do you make of those text messages between Sarah and Dr. Ryan? Chat now with the 48 Hours team on Facebook and X.
I knew the case was solid.
Detective Ian Iacovello was sure Dr. James Ryan was responsible for Sarah Harris's death. And he had no problem convincing prosecutors on Montgomery County's overdose task force. Jennifer Harrison.
It's his fault.
James Dietrich.
He was the one who was providing those drugs.
And Kimberly Sissel.
He knew how dangerous these drugs were.
Ryan was a doctor after all, but as certain as prosecutors were that he knew he was risking Sarah's life, they had no conclusive evidence he intended to kill her.
We never suggested that. You can accept that James Ryan loved Sarah Harris, but it does not excuse all the other actions that he took that led to Sarah's death.
So they charge Ryan with a subcategory of second-degree murder unfamiliar to many people. It's known as Depraved Heart Murder. Prosecutors say the charge doesn't require proving the killer actually wanted anyone dead, only that they knew their actions would likely kill someone and didn't care.
We have to prove that he did it with reckless disregard for the value of her life.
Dietrich gave us an example.
For instance, if I take a gun and just randomly shoot it into a crowd, I may not necessarily want or care that anybody dies, but that is such a grossly reckless act that someone's likely to die.
Prosecutors also charge Ryan with a slightly lesser charge, involuntary manslaughter, plus 2 counts of drug distribution and 1 count of possession with intent to distribute.
Ladies and gentlemen, meet Dr. James Ryan.
Opening statements begin on August 16th, 2023. There are no cameras in court, but there is an audio recording.
But behind closed doors, he was conducting a deadly medical experiment on his 25-year-old patient turned employee turned living girlfriend.
The prosecution portrays Ryan as a controlling older man who got his glamorous young girlfriend hooked on drugs.
He was stealing dangerous sedation drugs from his business and administering them to his girlfriend, Sarah Harris.
Prosecutors say the proof of Ryan's guilt is largely in those text messages. Ryan offering to get rid of Sarah's anxiety in 6 seconds, telling her he gave her ketamine while she was sleeping, and on the night before her body was found, apparently agreeing to bring ketamine home to her.
Can you tell us about Sarah?
I don't know where to start. I was the first to testify.
She was my baby.
Tina Harris is emotional as she relives Sarah's downward spiral just months before dying.
I asked to see her arms. She said, "No, Mama." But I grabbed her arm and I pulled at the sleeves, and her little arms were covered in needle marks and bruises.
And the medical examiner tells the jury about the dangerous drug cocktail that brought her life to a tragic end.
When people use all three together, those just cause profound, strong sedation.
The drugs can be so dangerous, in fact, the prosecution tells jurors that doctors who use these drugs have equipment and protocols in place to revive patients if needed.
Even though Dr. Ryan would follow all of those safety protocols in his own office, he would never follow those at home.
She was chemically dependent on him.
She was chemically dependent on him.
Prosecutors also call social worker Janice Miller, who says that kind of power imbalance is a hallmark of abusive relationships.
The drugs were the way that he controlled her and really ensured that she wouldn't leave the relationship.
He's created an addict.
Dr. Ryan and his attorneys did not agree to be interviewed by 48 Hours, but at trial, they argue Sarah Harris may have played an important role in her own demise, suggesting that after wrestling with mental illness, she was now losing her battle with anxiety, depression, and drugs.
Their focus on Sarah Harris is obviously her mental illness.
The defense suggests Sarah may have begun stealing the drugs herself. They want the jury to know about her Facebook post about seeing her deceased brother soon, but the judge won't allow it. But they are allowed to tell jurors about a text Sarah sent Ryan months before her death.
She says, "I've lost my will to live."
I've lost my will to live.
Do you think there's any chance Sarah was suicidal?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Where's the indication of a suicide on the scene? There is none.
Detective Icavello says the drug bottles found in Sarah's purse were too far from her body for her to have given them to herself.
These drugs are fast acting. She's gonna be out in seconds. How she put all the medication in her purse, then went and laid down? Not possible.
She wouldn't have cleaned up. Somebody else had to have done it.
But according to CBS News consultant Mary Fulginiti, the defense argues that detectives mishandled the scene, that there's no way to know exactly what happened, including who administered the fatal dose.
They didn't test to see if his DNA or fingerprints were on those syringes.
Dr. Ryan chooses not to testify. The defense argues he was a loving partner who was just trying to help Sarah.
This is a case about caring for somebody and possibly loving them to death.
His lawyers call a friend who saw Sarah using drugs before she began dating Ryan, and a relative who saw them as a happy couple. In closings, prosecutors remind the jury that to convict Ryan of depraved heart murder, it doesn't matter whether or not he actually put the drugs in Sarah's body, or even whether or not he wanted her to die.
The act of giving her the drugs is him handing her a loaded gun.
But would the jury agree?
If you were a juror in this case, what would be your verdict and why? Learn more about the case at 48hours.com.
I try to believe the best in people, and
For as long as Kyle Stevens can remember, his friend, Dr. James Ryan, has done right by people.
he was a pretty straight-laced, clean-cut guy.
When he talked about Sarah, how did he sound?
In the beginning, he seemed enthusiastic and excited.
But Stephen says at a certain point, Ryan did reach out with a concern.
He had asked about how to best be helpful and supportive to someone in that place of depression and possibly addiction.
Did it make you wonder if he was actually asking about Sarah?
Yeah, but I didn't press.
So Stephen says he had no idea what was really going on between the two. Then he discovered his friend was arrested and headed to trial.
When you heard the verdict, what did you think?
I was taken back.
After a nearly 2-week trial, it takes jurors less than 3 hours to reach their decision.
Up to count 1, murder in second degree.
Guilty.
On August 25th, 2023, they find James Ryan guilty of the second-degree depraved heart murder of Sarah Harris.
Relief.
Yeah, relief.
They also convict Ryan on the manslaughter and drug charges.
My heart just felt satisfied.
Sarah's voice was heard through this.
Tina and Rachel speak at a press conference after the verdict.
She was this beautiful beauty queen, and she wasted away at the hands of Dr. James Ryan.
And again at sentencing months later.
He is a predator. He is a wolf in sheep's clothing. Please. Put it on my heart until his life is done.
But James Ryan's lawyers had submitted supportive letters from his friends and a legal filing which detailed that James Ryan had his own struggles with drugs and mental health. Ryan addresses the court and insists he didn't administer the lethal dose, but takes responsibility for not preventing Sarah's access to the drugs that killed her.
The words do not exist to convey and express the level of remorse I feel.
Though the guidelines suggest a sentence of 15 to 25 years for this case of depraved heart murder, the judge has something else in mind.
It is the sentence of this court that you be committed to the Maryland Division of Corrections for a period of 40 years.
With more time for the other counts, it's a total of 45 years in prison.
A 45-year sentence puts James Ryan in a category with some violent murderers.
45 years for James Ryan is basically life. Patients rely on doctors and their expertise and their advice. And I think she's sending a very loud message to the medical community.
And State's Attorney John McCarthy wants to send a message to lawmakers. The depraved heart murder charge may have worked in this trial, but it's a difficult crime to prove in other overdose cases.
We need tougher laws.
As early as 2015, McCarthy began pushing to streamline Maryland law so state prosecutors can more easily convict dealers and distributors who supply the drugs that lead to overdose deaths. But it hasn't been easy.
We're not at a place in Maryland right now that the legislature seems very interested in creating new crimes and new penalties.
Ian Icavello, who read murder between the lines of this case and retired after the trial, says he still thinks of Sarah often.
I did everything I could for her.
So does her ex-boyfriend Henry Peterson, who looks back at their breakup with regret.
I guess I always thought she was going to be there.
A regret Sarah seemed to share. He showed us a letter she wrote him years earlier when their relationship ended.
You made me feel alive. Now that you're gone, I feel so many pieces and parts have died with you.
As if to preserve his connection to Sarah, Peterson still practices a concerto he played at her grave. Where today, a mother who faced great loss with even greater courage struggles to face the future without Sarah and her brother, so close in life and death that she actually buried their ashes in the same casket.
I hear Sarah telling me, Mama, it's okay.
What do you want your daughter's legacy to be?
I want people to remember my Sarah as a light, a brilliant young woman who cared about others and loved life. Loved it.
As a kid growing up in Chicago, there was one horror movie I was too scared to watch. It was called Candyman. But did you know that the movie Candyman was partly inspired by an actual murder? Listen to Candyman, the true story behind the bathroom mirror murder, wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Erin Moriarty of 48 Hours, and of all the cases I've covered, this is the one that troubles me most. Listen to Murder in the Orange Grove, the troubled case against Crosley Green, wherever you get your podcasts.
There's definitely mysteries involved in this case.
It was a cold Halloween morning, even had some snow on the ground. The call came out at 5:37 in the morning.
My wife died.
Colby Trickle had called our dispatch. He met us on the porch.
Exactly, where's the house?
It's right here. It's this one with red and white.
Did he seem upset?
I mean, there were tears coming down, and it was hard to understand, was choked up. We go up to the door, start making announcements inside.
Hey, police department!
Looking to my left is when I first see Kristen. I kind of focused in on her jaw moving. I could see the movement of her jaw.
We've got a pulse. We're gonna start CPR. You have a pulse? Yeah. Yep.
So she was still alive.
We were hopeful.
Could she be saved?
No.
After you did your autopsy, how did you rule on Kristen Trickle's death? Homicide or suicide?
Suicide.
Suicide.
The victim's family in this, right out of the gate, was just adamant that this was not a suicide.
The scene was kind of unusual. We had a female with a large weapon laying in bed, and it's not common to see that.
You have a replica or a very similar type of gun. Can you show it to me?
Sure.
How large? Oh.
It's pretty hefty, as you can tell. It's a hand cannon.
I'm a little surprised.
Yeah, it's awkward to maneuver, not something you'd easily turn on yourself.
We had evidence that led us to believe that Colby Trickle had killed his wife.
I do not believe he did it. I was Colby Trickle's defense attorney. When he called 911, she was still showing signs of life. Had he intended to murder her, it just seems odd that he would call immediately. I think it's very possible that Kristen Trickle picked up a gun that night in great anguish and ended her life.
A professional came in and looked at the life of Kristen, dug into basically every aspect of her life, got into who Kristen was prior to her death.
So basically, this is a psychological autopsy trying to figure out the state of mind of a person who died. That's difficult to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
And had this ever been done in the state of Kansas before?
Never in a criminal case, no.
Sergeant Brandon Hauptman of the Hayes Police Department vividly remembers the dark, cold Halloween morning as he arrived at Kristen Trickle's home.
The bedroom she was in is actually this window on the left.
Oh, the bedroom's right there.
Yeah, that's the bedroom right there.
And the moment he found the 26-year-old near death in bed.
I could see the firearm. From what I could tell initially, a large caliber revolver, and laying across her abdomen about like this.
How was she dressed?
Almost fully undressed. She was just wearing underwear.
After Kristen showed signs of life, the sergeant quickly moved the revolver away from her and carried Kristen into the living room for CPR.
The only injury that I could see at that point was the entrance wound.
And where was that entrance wound?
Underneath her chin here.
There was nothing the first responders could do for Kristen.
I went out to Colby on the porch and told him that she had died.
Hello. My name's Brandon Hauptman. I'm the sergeant working today.
Hauptman's body camera was only recording audio that day.
She died. And I'm so sorry.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
Sergeant Hauptman says he asked Kristen's husband, Colby, to go to the police station so he could tell investigators what happened. Did he seem to be cooperative?
He was, yep. Agreed to go up. We got him some shoes.
At the station, Colby said that hours earlier, Kristen had come home from Walmart, where she worked in the gardening center, and the couple had played video games. He went to bed before his wife, he said, and woke up to his ears ringing. And then found Kristen lying next to him with a gunshot wound to her head.
I ran up to her. And she was just looking at me.
Then what did you do?
I ran over to my phone and I called 911.
Colby told investigators that while he was on the phone with 911, he checked Kristen's pulse but felt nothing, and then picked the revolver off her body.
Where was the gun at?
It was laying by her neck. I pulled it back.
What did you do with the gun?
For a moment, he says he thought about taking his own life.
I started to put bullets in my head. But I was on the phone. They said they were sending people. So I thought maybe they could help her.
While Colby Trickle was still at the station, Kristen's Aunt Delynn and Uncle Brant Rice, a local pastor, found out Kristen had died.
I got a call from my mom, and worst phone call ever to get. She said, Kristen's dead. She's been shot. And it was just awful. I said, Mom, that can't be right. That can't be right. That doesn't even make sense.
But more baffling was that Colby had said Kristen's death was a suicide. What did you tell investigators initially? We just don't think she would do this?
Oh, 100%. I said, there's no way of all the people I know in this world, the last person that I would ever think would take their own life would be Kristen because of the joy she has.
It's so out of character to Kristen and how she solves problems. She's not a runner from problems.
Delynn and Brant Rice say Kristen's family and her 2 dogs meant the world to her.
The thought of her hurting herself in any way.
Or anyone.
Or anyone is so foreign. She would never take her life and not tie up loose ends with her family, make sure her dogs had somewhere to go.
And they believe they knew her better than just about anyone else. They had watched her grow up.
It is hard to find a photograph she is not smiling just fully.
She had had that smile even though Delynn and Brant say Kristen had a tough childhood. Her mother left her and her father when Kristen was 2 years old. When she was 17, Kristen moved in with her aunt and uncle and their 3 kids. Delynn and Brant say she thrived.
She loved being with our family. She loved the peace in our home.
Chloe is Brant and Delynn's daughter.
Kristen was my older sister figure in my life, and I really looked up to her, and she was just like always there to make me smile and feel important.
The family remembers when Kristen met Colby. They were both 18 years old.
Colby attended our church. Colby, for a time, was on the worship team at our church. They are the band that plays the worship music during our services. He wowed her with his guitar playing abilities, songs that he had written.
As years went on, I quickly grew.
But just 5 years later, Kristen was dead, and Colby was saying she took her own life. Coroner Lyle Nordhook examined the scene, and looking at the wound, he believed the revolver was in close range to her chin when it was fired. And in Nordhook's experience, that was not unusual for a self-inflicted gunshot wound. How would you believe the revolver was being held?
Close to the chin and parallel to the body.
Like this.
Yeah.
But Detective J.B. Burkholder had also been called to the house.
We respond to suicides. They happen several times a year.
And to him, this didn't seem like suicide.
Having a female with a gunshot wound, especially to the head, was unusual for us.
Why? Why is that more unusual for women, you think?
For women, they're a little bit more concerned about looks, even after death, and so they think about that.
And there was something else.
When I got there, I remember an alarm going off.
Kristen's cell phone alarm is heard repeatedly on audio recorded by first responders.
I think I actually silenced it. She had set an alarm to get up, to get ready for work, and had plans for that day. A lot of times individuals who are thinking about suicide, they're not setting alarms. It doesn't matter when they get up. There was candy set out in the kitchen area. She and Colby had planned for Halloween to go on as it normally would with trick-or-treating.
And nothing troubled him more than that weapon found at the scene. Detective Burkholder wasn't sure Kristen was the one who fired it.
The gun was a full-size .357 revolver, a large caliber weapon, approximately 11 to 12 inches. It can be hard to handle. And so being able to place that gun under your chin and discharge that firearm just didn't seem very likely for a smaller female in what was described as a dark bedroom. This wasn't an open and shut suicide case. There was questions.
After his wife Kristen died in the early morning hours on Halloween, Colby Trickle spoke with investigators for more than 11 hours.
Hello.
What's your name? Colby?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm so sorry.
He was asked over and over again to recount the events of the night before.
Do you guys have any fights, anything like that yesterday?
No.
Colby also told investigators about his job with the U.S. military as part of human intelligence.
There's some interesting places they send you with being intel, but they sent me to Middle East and they sent me down into Central America.
Sounds like some movie stuff right there.
First impressions of Colby Trickle is that he was a guy who was in the military. He had a decorated past of overseas tours. And then also Colby Trickle was a guy who loved his wife.
But Detective J.B. Burkholder says he had questions about Colby's account of the morning Kristen died. After finding Kristen, Colby says he called 911, and as he later told police, he picked up the gun and thought about ending his life. What troubled Burkholder is where Colby put the gun after he changed his mind, back on Kristen's stomach.
I put it back down and ran outside.
It's just very odd. It doesn't seem as though if I'm calling 911, if my wife's dying on the bed, that I would place the gun back down on her body.
Colby was asked if there was any life insurance on Kristen.
I have some on me from military, but that's it.
No insurance on Kristen, he said. And then was asked if he had anything to do with Kristen's death.
Did you in fact kill her?
No.
Colby left the police station that day, but first responder Sergeant Hauptman was increasingly suspicious about Colby's actions at the scene. He wondered why Colby didn't demand to be by Kristen's side as they tried to save her life.
Your wife's inside, and here she is, you know, bleeding out, dying, and you're on the porch.
While first responders were administering CPR, Colby was chatting with officers about video games. That conversation was recorded by a police body cam.
What kind of games do you guys like to play? Counter-Strike?
Everything from Call of Duty to Minecraft.
That day, as investigators got a search warrant for Colby's cell phone, an autopsy for Kristen Trickle was underway. At the scene, Coroner Lyle Nordhook, who suspected suicide, had looked for any evidence that someone else was involved, like signs of a struggle. Were there any signs of defensive wounds or any signs that she had fought with anyone before she died?
No, there were
Coroner Nordhook says he also examined Kristen's body for signs of past physical abuse.
Typically, if there's a series of progressive injuries over a period of time, so you can tell that they've been beating on each other. In this case, I wasn't really seeing that. So I'm going, well, I have to take the husband's statement at word value that he was there and the gun went off and she is dead.
Nordhook says 3 days after Kristen's death, based on the information he had at the time, he determined that the manner of death was a suicide. But Kristen's Uncle Brandt and Aunt Delynn say the more they learned about the facts of the case, the more questions they had.
When I heard that it was a gun, I thought there's no way. We knew Kristen was scared of guns. Kristen was also very, very private in her body, very modest. When I found out she was not dressed, that was shocking to me.
Reflecting on Kristen's relationship with Colby, Brandt and Delynn told authorities that for years they were bothered by what they say was Colby's controlling behavior.
If she didn't immediately respond to a text or wasn't able to answer her phone, he would get very frustrated with her. He wanted her at his beck and call.
At the time, the Rices say they told Kristen they had serious concerns about Colby.
We know that she was not happy with us. I believe that he convinced her that we were against her, and therefore she separated herself somewhat.
Kristen decided to marry Colby and eventually moved almost 300 miles away to Kansas City. But life for the couple was difficult, says Brandt. Colby enlisted with the Army Reserve and did odd jobs. Kristen worked at a vet clinic. Money was tight. In early 2019, the couple moved back to the Hayes area, and the Rices say Kristen was coming to their church again.
Oh, we were thrilled.
We were so thrilled to reconnect with Kristen, and it was just like it was when she lived in our home.
Yeah.
And in the months before her death, they say, she was making plans to launch her pet boarding business.
She had picked out a little house that's south of town and has a little barn behind it, and she wanted to turn the little barn into the boarding area.
To the Rice family, Kristen seemed happy and excited for her future. But after her death, Brandt and Delynn wondered about Colby. Was Colby capable of murder? As investigators began digging into Colby's story, they pored over the data in his cell phone.
There's several, I guess 2 big aha moments.
They discovered Colby had been exchanging flirtatious Snapchat messages with another woman.
He I had conversations with her, which would be described as a sexting conversation.
Also on that cell phone, according to Detective J.B. Burkholder, was evidence that contradicted what Colby had first told investigators when asked about life insurance on his wife.
I have some on me from military, but that's it.
Cell phone data revealed that not only was Colby aware Kristen was covered by a life insurance policy called SGLI for spouses of military members, in the days before her death, they say, he Googled the amount the policy would pay out.
Detective Ridgway was able to find well, I believe it was a screenshot of a search that he had conducted 10 days prior to Kristen's death, asking what his spouse's life insurance would be.
On November 4th, 2019, investigators asked Colby to return for more questioning.
Approximately 10 days ago, you looked up a life insurance issue?
When? I never did.
You did?
I never did it. If I would die?
No, if your spouse died.
Colby, who agreed to talk without a lawyer, suggested that Kristen might have done the search herself on his phone.
We always gave each other access to each other's phones and stuff.
Investigators also asked Colby about his online relationship. Colby admitted that it had started a few months prior to his wife's death, after he met the woman on a group chat while playing video games.
Did Kristen find out about that relationship? Not that I know of.
Colby told them the relationship was a virtual one, that he had never actually met the woman. But investigators discovered he had been texting with her just hours after Kristen's death, while he was still at the police station.
I guess to his credit, he said that he was busy and couldn't talk right now, but then he said, I wish I could.
Aaron Cunningham is Assistant Ellis County Attorney.
Which is probably the last thing that you should say to a woman you're having an online affair with when you're being investigated about your wife's death.
When Colby Trickle left the police station after his second interview, Detective Burkholder checked out his claim that Kristen had used his phone to research life insurance policies.
We were able to get surveillance video from the Walmart store.
What they discovered was that Kristen was at work at Walmart at the time the cell phone search was made.
We were able to see that she didn't have access to a phone.
The inconsistencies in Colby's statements kept piling up, says Burkholder, like this one.
She keeps the revolver on her side.
Colby had said Kristen had kept the .357 revolver by her side of the bed, but that didn't seem to line up with what Burkholder saw at the scene.
When we looked at the scene, we saw multiple firearms on what was described as Colby's side of the bed.
There were also photos of the couple's bedroom found on Colby's phone.
So this picture was taken, I believe, a month prior to Kristen's death. You see a large framed revolver on the bed where Colby Trickle's described as being his.
And do you think that's the .357?
That's the only .357 in the house that we found. That tells me that this was Colby's gun.
Still, the investigation stalled.
You have all these investigators who are uncovering more and more evidence that there's something really wrong with this case. And you've got the coroner who calls this a suicide. I mean, that's a problem, isn't it?
It is and it isn't. And
it was initially, wasn't it?
Sure. Well, certainly, as far as their ability to investigate as efficiently as they normally would.
Cunningham says that the coroner's determination that Kristen had died by suicide limited the investigators' ability to obtain search warrants.
There was still elements of the investigation law enforcement wanted to follow up on.
In the winter of 2020, Colby began collecting payouts from two insurance policies, $23,000 from Walmart and $100,000 from the U.S. military. Meanwhile, investigators continued to learn more about his time in the military.
He was a reserve officer in the military that was never deployed.
Wait a minute. So he was never deployed to Central America?
He had no overseas deployments that were told to us by the United States military.
And he had no experience talking to informants as part of his job as an intelligence analyst.
Right.
But even with what looked like blatant lies and an apparent motive to kill his wife, police didn't arrest Colby. So in the year after Kristen's death, authorities watched as Colby Trickle went on with his life.
Maybe I'm foolish and maybe
It is very frustrating to me. I would run into him in public.
Playing music at a restaurant in town.
It made my skin crawl.
So whatever storm you're in, keep pushing forward.
Posting Facebook self-help videos.
Get to the outside where you're free and enjoy life.
But then, nearly 2 years after Kristen's death, a newly elected county attorney decided to try something very new that he thought could put Colby away for life.
Go behind the scenes with the 48 Hours Postmortem podcast.
County Attorney Robert Anderson was just days into his new job in January of 2021 when Assistant County Attorney Aaron Cunningham and Detective J.B. Burkholder pulled him aside.
JB and I both cornered him and said, this is something that's clearly a homicide. Help us to get the nails put in this coffin.
After reviewing the file, Anderson believed that the coroner got it wrong and that this was a homicide. On July 14, 2021, he charged Colby Trickle with the murder of his wife, Kristen.
Certainly, the insurance money provides motive. In addition, being in bed next to your husband, naked, shooting oneself in the face, after having set alarms to get up the next day for work, after setting out candy for Halloween, these circumstances don't point to a woman who was planning a suicide.
Hey, can I get you to step out of the car and come to the back of the car with me? Soon.
When police arrested Colby, he didn't seem surprised.
Detectives, I have some questions for you.
Sure.
Place you under arrest. You turn around, put your hands behind your back.
Sure.
And denied killing Kristen.
I didn't do it, and I know many people don't believe that, and I respect that.
I believe him.
You don't believe that he would shoot his wife?
I do not.
Cassie Ziegler is one of Colby Trickle's defense attorneys.
He cares about his spiritual life. He's a devoted Christian. I don't see that in him, this ability to connive and plan all of this.
Instead, she says Kristen had suffered from depression since childhood.
I think that Kristen dealt with a lot more pain in her life than people acknowledged. I don't think there's any worse rejection in life than to be rejected by your biological mother. At an early age, that's exactly what happened.
Colby's attorney felt confident. Going into the trial, the coroner was standing by his assessment that Kristen's death was a suicide.
You had the ability, you had the power to change this determination if you wanted to prior to trial.
Yes.
You could have, but you didn't.
If I've made a determination, am I going to change it to homicide based on an accusation before a court proceeding? No.
So County Attorney Anderson knew he had to do something to convince a jury that Kristen didn't die by suicide. And that's when he pursued a different type of autopsy, a psychological one, an autopsy of the mind. And to conduct it, Anderson hired a forensic psychologist, Dr. Ashley Christensen. Her job? To determine Kristen's state of mind leading up to her death.
Being unable to speak with them because they're, of course, no longer here, they have to speak with their family, their friends, their coworkers. They review any social media, diaries, journals, anything that they can.
Christensen's conclusions would eventually take center stage at Colby Trickle's trial. It was September 2023.
Members of the jury.
And Prosecutor Cunningham began by telling the jury that Kristen Trickle was murdered for the oldest reasons in the world.
This case is as simple as A, B, C. A, an affair. B, a breakdown of control. And C, cold hard cash.
Colby's attorney disputed that.
You may proceed whenever you're ready, Ms. Ziegler.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Cassie Ziegler says Colby's alleged affair was really just an online flirtation.
I don't think there was a plan to have this long-term intimate affair.
She also denies that Colby plotted to kill Kristen for cash. And about that Google search into the life insurance payout, Ziegler says Colby doesn't remember doing that search, but she acknowledges he had been filling out paperwork around that time for his own military life insurance. And if he did do it, maybe that's why.
It's just a coincidence that this is happening days before his wife dies.
Unfortunately so, yeah. Bad timing.
At trial, the jury learned that Colby Trickle had not only collected more than $120,000 from 2 life insurance policies on his wife, he had already gone through it.
I think he had spent all of the money in approximately 8 months.
What did he spend the money on? When Detective J.B. Burkholder took the stand, he was asked to describe one expenditure in particular.
There's a $1,942 payment to True Touch Dolls. Were you able to determine what that was?
This is a company that made and manufactures and distributes life-size sex dolls.
Colby's attorney says Colby was having trouble sleeping alone and was quite open about the purchase.
He went and talked to his mother about it. If you're going to buy if you're going to buy a sex toy, a grown man's not going to go talk to his mother about this sex doll he's going to buy.
What was your reaction to that?
Disgusted. Just disgusted.
It was described at trial that he needed this doll for comfort.
For comfort and warmth. We have electric blankets that we use for that.
When Brant Rice took the stand, he told the jury that his niece had become more assertive in her relationship with her husband in the months before her death.
I feel that she had really begun to stand up for herself. We were proud of her for that.
And there were texts, says Cunningham, that seemed to support that Colby feared he was losing control over Kristen. On April 8, 2019, when Colby texted that Kristen seemed different and pushy with things, she responded,
I'm just deciding to stick up for myself. Just like you, I'm taking control of the situation.
And then prosecutors called their star witness, Dr. Ashley Christensen.
Around the time of her death, there was a lot of data suggesting that she had a lot of hope.
Dr. Christensen testified that Kristen talked to family members about future plans and seemed optimistic.
She wanted to open her own either pet boarding or dog grooming business and had discussed his goal for opening her business.
But Christensen also testified that she interviewed Colby for her report, and he offered what sounded like a reason why Kristen might have been stressed. He told the doctor Kristen knew about his online relationship with that other woman.
He reported that they had last discussed that relationship the week of her death.
But remember, in his police interview, Colby had told investigators that he didn't think Kristen knew.
Why did Kristen find out about that relationship?
Not that I know of.
So which is it? Did she know or she didn't know?
I believe she knew.
Whether or not Kristen knew, Dr. Christensen told the jury she believed that at the time of her death, Kristen was at a low risk for suicide.
It is my opinion that it is relatively less likely that her death was the result of suicide.
I love those words, relatively less likely. That doesn't tell me anything. We can't know the mind of someone who's going to end their life.
Defense attorney Ziegler does not think the report should have been allowed in as evidence. She points out that Dr. Christensen, who never met Kristen Trickle, did interviews and prepared her report nearly 2 years after Kristen's death. And Ziegler believes people's memories change over time.
That is a long time to go back and talk to people about Kristen.
But prosecutors thought there was another piece of evidence that could bring them a guilty verdict.
What do you think is the most powerful evidence against Colby Trickle? Chat now with the 48 Hours team on Facebook and X.
Nearly 4 years have passed since Kristen Trickle died from a gunshot wound to her head.
How would you describe the last 4 years?
Hellish.
On September 22nd, 2023, it was Colby Trickle's last chance to convince a jury that he had nothing to do with his wife's death. He decided not to testify, but his attorney, Cassie Ziegler, called his mother, Tina Kreitzer, to the stand.
Is it fair to say that Kristen was pretty reserved at first when you met her? Yeah, very to herself.
Kreitzer described her daughter-in-law as a woman who rarely revealed her feelings.
Couldn't read her, very emotionless.
It's a drastically different Kristen, says attorney Ziegler, than the one her family describes.
By their explanation, just the happiest, most joyful person, never stops smiling. She almost is walking on water. I mean, when the reality is we have no idea how she's really feeling. Now you find out he's having an emotional relationship with someone else online. I can imagine that being the last straw.
But in his final argument to the jurors, prosecutor Aaron Cunningham shows them the weapon that killed Kristen and says she couldn't have fired it.
Members of the jury, this doesn't add up. The state is going to demonstrate it to you.
Prosecutor Cunningham showed us with a similar gun.
If you look at the autopsy photos, you see a little divot at the 3 o'clock mark, which is believed by the coroner to be the sight imprint of the gun.
See that?
And I knew Kristen was right-handed. The natural way a right-handed person would hold a gun to their head for suicide would be something like this, or maybe something like this, putting the sight mark somewhere between 9 o'clock and 6 o'clock. So for the sight mark to have wound up over at the 3 o'clock angle would be very unnatural.
Cunningham showed us how he believes Colby Trickle shot his wife while she slept next to him.
It would be consistent with the placement of the sight mark that he would have grabbed the gun from his nightstand, rolled over in bed, and placed the gun just underneath her chin and pulled the trigger.
So if you keep it here, then this would explain
Correct.
What appears on her neck here.
As the case went to the jury, Ziegler had hoped that they would still have too many doubts.
How significant is it, the fact that the coroner went to trial still saying it was a suicide when the prosecutors are saying it's a homicide?
Yeah, it's huge. We have to show doubt that's reasonable. And I think there's plenty of that.
That's what Kristen's family feared as well.
All they have to do is convince one of those 12 that they have a reasonable doubt. What are we going to do if he walks out a free man?
They don't have to wait long. Less than 2 hours later, there was a verdict.
Count one, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of premeditated murder in the first degree of Kristen Trickle.
Colby Trickle was found guilty for first-degree premeditated murder and interference with law enforcement, falsely reporting information.
What do you remember of the verdict? What did you hear?
Just feeling like I could breathe.
Yeah.
Just feeling a breath.
The relief for safety for our family.
I feel like we got our life back.
Yeah.
After the verdict, we spoke with coroner Lyle Nordhook, who said he planned to amend Kristen Trickle's death certificate to now read homicide. He admitted he had decided on suicide before talking to anyone in Kristen's family, or seen the weapon used to kill her. But I'm a little surprised. Wouldn't that have been important for you to know the size of the weapon to be able to make your death investigation determination?
The police should have all that information, and it's usually correlated with the pathologist, but it wasn't in this case.
The fact that he had done research on insurance, were you aware of that?
No.
Were you aware that they found evidence that he was having an online affair?
No, they didn't share that with me either.
If you had known that, would you have left that as suicide?
No.
Investigators acknowledge they should have done a better job keeping him informed. On November 20th, 2023, Colby Trickle returned to court for sentencing, admitting only that he could have been a better husband.
Something that I cannot apologize for is harming Kristen that morning, because I cannot apologize for what I didn't do. Regardless of that fact, I still take partial blame for that morning. I always wonder if she would still be here had I been a better husband.
Judge Glenn Braun sentenced Colby Trickle.
The court will sentence you to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 50 years.
With Colby Trickle in prison, the Rices say their family is finally beginning to grieve the young woman gone way too soon.
Sometimes I think about how
Kristen's cousin Chloe, who grew up with Kristen, wrote a song for her.
we'd never say goodbye.
How often do you think about Kristen?
All the time. Every day.
Every day. You know, we drive by that little house.
The house where Kristen one day hoped to start her dream business.
You call it Kristen's house, don't you?
Yeah.
She had a future. She had found her faith again.
When you were with her, you felt loved, a beautiful heart, a gentle, gentle spirit. And she was just an amazing girl.
I never had the chance, so now I'm telling you goodbye.
New CBS Next. A young girl found dead in a swamp.
Did this look like an accident or something else? Something entirely different.
A decades-old mystery with a surprising answer.
Oh no. Oh no. I never would have guessed how this ended.
48 Hours is all new. CBS Next. And streaming on Paramount Plus.
One of my friends' mom had texted me because she lived pretty close to Grapevine Lake. And she was like, look what happened.
Developing story right now, a body found on the banks of Grapevine Lake.
Nothing happens in Grapevine. Nothing except for what he did.
The victim was identified as Jacqueline Vandagriff.
Hello everyone, my name is Jacqueline Vandagriff, but friends call me Jackie.
Jackie Vandagriff was 24 years of age.
I am currently a junior here at Texas Women's University, and my major is nutrition with an emphasis in wellness.
And just beyond this area where the shade is pretty much hitting is where we had our crime scene. There are a lot of things that will shock you, and this is by far the worst thing I have seen.
My manager texted me, Charles has just been arrested. I felt like the world was spinning, like everything was out of control.
It's believed that last Tuesday, Jacqueline Vandagriff met up with Charles Bryant at a bar in Denton. Surveillance video, also cell phone pings, all put Vandagriff and Bryant together.
I remember him just being kind of quiet. I immediately said, there's no way. They have the wrong guy. There's no way that he did this.
Are you telling me there's no evidence that Charles Bryant killed Jackie Vandagriff?
Not direct evidence.
This is kind of my calling, dealing with these really strange cases, the serial killers, the ritualistic killings.
Hey, how you doing? Today, so good. Jim home with the Rangers. Life good today or not?
Today. This is not a normal homicide.
And you know how they kill someone.
It all seemed to have started with Caitlin.
How screwed up are you from Caitlin, man?
In the early days, it was good. After that first month, that's when I started to see these warning signs that he was manipulative, very controlling. I just told him, I can't do this anymore, this isn't working, this is over. He flipped out.
He showed up at your dorm room out of the blue. You never gave him the address.
No.
You know you trespassed. In his mind, he was seeking revenge.
The warrant that we got is for stalking.
On his ex-girlfriend, who had called the police on him.
How he was stalking me was completely related to Jackie Vandagriff's death.
There's some similarities of the way that Vandagriff looks and the way that Brian's ex-girlfriend looked.
Do you think there's a chance, a possibility, that he walked into this bar and saw somebody who reminded him of you and took his rage out on her?
Most definitely. I think that he really wanted to kill me. I think that he wanted me dead.
When I first arrived on the scene, I saw a lot of police cars, saw fire trucks. There was a lot of activity.
It was September 14th, 2016, just before dawn, when John Luna, a captain with the Grapevine Police Department, responded to a call about a gruesome discovery here at Grapevine Lake.
Just off of the worn footpath, you have an area that's pretty well overgrown with weeds, but you can clearly see a small area that was burned just beyond where I'm standing. There was a body that was obviously charred. It had been set on fire.
The body, found inside a blue kiddie pool, was so badly damaged that police could not determine the most basic facts about the victim.
We didn't know if that was an adult or a child, a male or a female.
The next day, using fingerprints, police were able to identify the victim. It was Jackie Vandagriff, a 24-year-old nutrition major at Texas Women's University in nearby Denton.
I chose this major because I realized the importance of nutrition and just overall health.
We're both named Jacqueline, named after Jacqueline Kennedy.
One of Jackie Vandagriff's closest friends, Jackie Tan. They met in high school.
Ever since then, we were Jackie squared, and I loved it. She made me feel like I could be myself and just be goofy and funny.
Jackie Tan remembers her friend as a good student who was focused and trusting.
That girl, smartest girl I've known.
She had her whole life ahead of her. She had plans. Me and my detectives, we went out there for her memorial service. And, sorry.
For Captain Luna, the brutality of this crime hit close to home.
Could have just as easily been my daughter that this happened to.
Jackie spent the last evening of her life in Denton with this man. Police didn't know his identity right away, but this woman knew him very well.
He would always give me flowers, always, especially if he had something to be sorry about.
Charles Bryant lived some 20 miles away, but he had been making frequent visits to Denton, trying to rekindle a relationship with his ex-girlfriend, Caitlin Mathis, who had recently moved there to attend the University of North Texas.
He was just trying to win me back, and I was just like, nothing is gonna work.
Caitlin's involvement with Bryant had begun 3 months earlier, in June, in the town of Grapevine, when he came into the restaurant where Caitlin was working as a server.
The day that I met him was the day after I graduated high school. He had lots of muscles and tattoos, which kind of interested me at the time.
Bryant was then 29, working as a bartender and personal trainer.
You're 18, he's 29. He's got muscles and tattoos and must have made your mother crazy.
Yeah, extremely crazy. In a good way, though, yeah. She cared about me.
Being a mother of adult children is a different role. You have to let go for them to fly away and grow up with you.
Caitlin is the youngest of Karen Halsey's 4 children. She says Caitlin was hard to miss.
Fireball. You know, when she's in the house, she never walked anywhere. She ran everywhere.
And Caitlin ran headlong into the relationship with Charles Bryant that summer of 2016. One of their regular date spots was at the park by Grapevine Lake, where this picture was taken. When Karen learned about the relationship, she asked Caitlin to show her a picture of him.
I got this feeling just deep inside to my bones, an evil feeling. And I said, he's going to hurt you. He's going to do something bad.
Wow.
And she's like, oh, he's nice. He's good to me. He makes me feel like an adult.
Were you thinking to yourself, you're 18, you're too young to know?
Yes. But I didn't want to insult her.
Within weeks, Caitlin was having serious doubts of her own about Bryant.
That's when I started to see these warning signs that he was manipulative, he was a bit of a narcissist. He thought very highly of himself. He would say things like, oh, you'll never find anyone better than me. It was toxic, and he was toxic.
In mid-August 2016, Caitlin broke up with Bryant. She thought that was the last she'd see of him. But the next day, he showed up uninvited at her mother's house.
And somehow he convinced me to get back with him. He was trying to say, oh, I can work on this and I can be better, and making all these promises.
But Caitlin realized she wasn't interested in promises.
That was one of the things that my mom taught me. People do not change. You can't change someone. At that point, I was just waiting for the perfect time to end things.
A little more than a week later, after Caitlin moved away to school, she told Bryant it was over again. Later that night, police found him on campus.
Just by sheer coincidence, I had made a traffic stop and he was driving that vehicle.
Captain Jeremy Polk was then a lieutenant for the UNT campus police. He pulled Bryant over early in the morning of August 24th.
I thought he was an intoxicated driver by the way he was driving, and that was my focus.
So right now I'm going to have to place you on, arrest. So you could just remain seated. It's all good.
Bryant was not over the legal limit. He was charged with a few outstanding traffic tickets, and they let him go. Later that same day, he was back on Caitlin's campus again.
He actually knocked on the door of my dorm room. He didn't know prior to where I lived. And he said, oh, your name was on the door.
Did that creep you out?
It did. At that point, I was scared.
Caitlin got him out of there and called campus police. Captain Polk recognized Bryant's name on the report and went along to interview Caitlin the next day.
She told us things like, I just did not like the way Charles spoke to me. I did not like the way he treated me, and I made that choice then and there. I would do everything I could to help her with this situation.
Polk issued a no trespass order, banning Charles Bryant from the UNT campus. But once again, Bryant would not take no for an answer.
The biggest fear I have as a police officer sometimes is emotion, because emotion drives people to do things you would never imagine.
It was my first day there, and he walked through the door, and my heart just dropped to the bottom of my stomach.
It was August 31st, 2016, a week since Charles Bryant had tracked Caitlin Mathis down at her new dorm. And now he was invading her space again, coming into her new restaurant on her first day of work.
I was like, I just want you to leave.
What did he say to that?
He didn't really say anything. He looked upset. My new coworkers, they were like, yeah, he was here yesterday looking for you.
Caitlin asked her manager to keep Bryant out, but her manager said there was nothing he could do.
I can't work here. I don't feel safe enough to work here.
Caitlin went back to her old job a half-hour's drive away. Her mother found it all hard to watch from a distance.
I said, come home. It was my motherly instinct to protect her, and in order to protect her, I had to have her with me.
But Caitlin thought she'd be safe in her dorm. A week later, on September 6th, what would have been their 3-month anniversary, Bryant was back, yet again.
He showed up to my dorm, knocked on my door, and at this point, I was shaking. I'm all alone. I actually hid in my suite mate's closet.
You hid?
Yes. When I was on the phone with the police, they were like, we can't hear you, you need to speak up. And I was just afraid that he was gonna hear my voice. I did hear him say, Caitlin, I know you're in there, just open up, I have something for you. And I'm like, God, what do you have for me? I don't want it.
Bryant left flowers and a 2-page letter. When police arrived, he was gone.
I heard him say, hey, it's Charles, I have something for you.
You know for sure it was him?
Yeah, I know it was him.
Sierra 27, myself and 443 going to be out.
Police found him outside 10 minutes later.
You have school here?
No.
What's your name?
Now in running clothes, and arrested him for trespassing.
But you know you're not supposed to be up there, right?
Bryant posted bond and was released within hours. Although Caitlin had already blocked him on her phone, email, and social media, he created a new email address and wrote to her later that same day. Here I am, heartbroken and with a criminal record for bringing the girl I love flowers.
That's when it became really serious for me. If an actual physical arrest doesn't stop the behavior, then something is wrong.
Captain Polk helped Caitlin get an emergency protective order. And because Bryant had kept trying to reach her after his arrest.
How you doing, Charles? Yep. You have your ID with you?
Polk had his officers go to Bryant's house the next day and charge him yet again, this time for stalking. This was his third arrest in 14 days.
I told him if he continued to communicate with Caitlin, I would use every email, I would use every text message, I would use every phone call as a reason to have him rearrested.
2 days later, Bryant posted a $5,000 bond and got out of jail.
He was telling his roommate that I was the crazy one in this relationship. So all of his friends were kind of coming at me, and they were like, why, you need to drop these charges against him.
By September 13th, Bryant was back in Denton, just a half mile from Caitlin's dorm, in an area she had told him about back when they were still dating.
I was talking about going up to Fry Street and meeting new people.
Bryant went to Fry Street Public House that night at about 7 p.m. An hour later, Jackie Vandagriff walked in, asked about a job, and ended up in a conversation with the bartender and Charles Bryant. About 45 minutes later, Jackie posted a message on her Twitter. I'm glad I decided to get off Tinder and walk to a bar. Jackie's friend, Jackie Tan.
Jackie was a very social person. Whenever she went out, she would make friends with everybody. And it wasn't even flirty. It wasn't anything, she was talking to the bartender, talking to other people.
At about 9 o'clock, Jackie left with Bryant and the bartender. She and Bryant went to another bar nearby and started talking to a group of women. By 9:45, it was raining and everyone was headed out. Jackie left with Charles Bryant.
I feel like she felt comfortable enough with him that night because she had been hanging out with him for so long that she was like, hey, well, whatever. He's just gonna drop me off. It's not that far, and I'll be good.
Once in his car, Bryant stopped at a convenience store. This was the last time Jackie Vandagriff was seen alive. The day after she was found dead, there was a new post on her Twitter. Never knew I could feel like this.
It was just really bizarre.
Police suspected it was a message from her killer, and they knew they had to move quickly to ID the man Jackie had been with. They had some luck when they tracked down the women Jackie met that night.
One of the friends that was with her had gotten a business card from this person because he was a fitness instructor.
Now the Grapevine police had Charles Bryant's name. They learned about that restraining order.
So in my eyes, that played into him as being a good suspect.
Grapevine police called Captain Polk, who was in the middle of a road race.
The first thing he told me was Charles Bryant was their main suspect in Jackie's murder, and I immediately just sat down on a park bench in the middle of the race. It floored me.
Bryant was emerging as a strong suspect, but Grapevine police did not have physical evidence connecting him to Jackie's death. So for now, Bryant was free, and Polk was worried about what he might do next.
I called Caitlin and I just asked, where are you?
I was like, does this have to do with the murder that happened in Grapevine? And he's like, I can't specify that to you, Caitlin, but are you safe right now?
And what did you say?
I said, I think so.
She might have been wrong. In the days after Jackie's murder, Charles Bryant sent Caitlin several emails, including this picture, writing on it, "First kiss under this tree once upon a time." That photo was taken at Grapevine Lake.
He might have taken that picture that same day that Jackie was killed.
It was September 2016, and Caitlin Mathis, Charles Bryant's ex-girlfriend, was very worried he might have been involved in the brutal murder at Grapevine Lake just days before.
I was waiting for more news to come out, because at that point, they hadn't even arrested him yet.
Were you worried he was going to come after you?
I was. I thought that's exactly what he was going to do.
The emails and picture Bryant had recently sent Caitlin were proof that he was still thinking about her in the days after Jackie was killed. But they were also proof of something else.
It was prohibited for Charles to communicate with her in any manner, and that if he did, he would have been violating that order.
Captain Polk thought they could use those violations to help the Grapevine police, who didn't have enough to make an arrest yet.
So I told the detective, we can get a warrant signed on some evidence we just got, and at least, get him off the street.
You go by Charles, you go by Dean? Charles. Okay.
Charles Bryant was arrested on September 18th for violating Caitlin's restraining order. Grapevine detectives were hoping they'd soon find more evidence connecting him to Jackie's death.
He's brought to the Grapevine Police Department for an interview, and right away he's beginning to distance himself from having almost any interaction with Jackie.
You recognize who she is?
We served a bar. And at the same time, we began serving a search warrant for his residence.
What can you tell me about her? That's about it, I guess.
It had been 4 days since Jackie's body was found. Plenty of time to dispose of any possible evidence. But Captain Luna at Grapevine PD says they found a lot at Bryant's home, including a large military-style knife.
And you know what? Her purse was found in there too.
Bryant had no way to answer for any of it, including 2 more items police found while he was in custody. Video of him buying a shovel the night Jackie disappeared, and a kiddie pool missing from his backyard that matched the one Jackie's body was found in.
We have video of you with this girl.
Show me.
You're at the bar. You're walking around Walmart at 4 o'clock in the morning buying a shovel. She's found dead in a pool that came from your backyard.
He even got to the point at the end of his interview with our detective where he said, well, I must have done it. I don't remember doing anything.
Everything points to me. It's like I had to have done it.
An open and shut case? Not even close. Although there was overwhelming evidence that Bryant had disposed of Jackie's body, there was no evidence yet that confirmed how Jackie had died, or that Bryant had killed her.
And that's when they reached out to me and asked if I could come in and spend some time with him and interview him and see what I could get.
Because you have an expertise in dealing with this kind of personality.
Right, this is kind of my calling.
Jim Holland is the senior member of an elite team of Texas Rangers, a select division of the Texas State Police. He specializes in interviewing some of the country's most prolific killers and analyzing their thoughts.
Hey, how you doing?
And Charles Bryant seemed to fit the bill. Jackie's body had been dismembered before being set on fire. How do you begin to understand a mind that would do that?
A lot of these people actually want to tell you. They want to tell someone.
At first, Bryant kept to his claim that he didn't remember a thing.
Yeah, it's crazy because I really don't remember meeting this girl.
The idea that he doesn't remember doing it, no, it's absolute nonsense.
So you knew Charles Bryant remembered exactly what had happened.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And your job was just to pull that out of him.
Right.
You know, you're not a violent dude. You haven't really been in trouble.
Holland says his strategy was to try to make friends with Bryant and get him talking.
You know, you obviously work out. I mean, you're a stud, right?
You don't want him to look at you as a law enforcement officer. You want him to think of you as a friend, a compadre, a drinking buddy. You know, you kind of go back to what 2 boys would talk about in a high school locker room, you know, about the girl they kissed on Friday night.
You don't have any issues with girls.
No, not by any means. They're just blowing my mind.
And Holland suggested possible scenarios to see if Bryant would take it from there.
Okay, so something happens. Bam, there's a snap. And we need to figure out what that is. And maybe, you know, she got mad. Maybe she's giving you all the signals and then cut you off. I mean, there could be all kinds of different things going on here, right? I mean, chicks, right? You know chicks?
You know, as we're going through the interview, I'm watching him. I'm, I guess in a way, a human lie detector. I'm reading him and I'm throwing things at him in which I know the answer. And I'm looking for his responses, whether they're false or true.
Under the pretense of helping Bryant remember what happened, Holland suggested they do a memory exercise.
What we're going to do is these mind exercises, which means we're going to move back in time.
Bryant, who first claimed he didn't know who Jackie was, then seemed to remember her. He said he could see her coming into the bar.
I think she was looking for a job. That's what it was.
And offering her a ride.
It makes sense. It was raining. I probably would offer to ride home.
There's tons of things in this that I can tell you, right?
Over a pizza, as Holland tried to steer Bryant to confess, he probed about a possible motive.
But what does everyone want to know? And yeah, why? And who's the only one who can tell us that?
Me.
Yeah.
Holland eventually cut to the chase and asked if what happened with Jackie was really all about Caitlin.
Was there a time that you pictured her as this girlfriend that did you wrong, or did anything like that come into play?
Mm-hmm.
The level of nonsense that came out of his mouth at different points about that was just astonishing.
Do you think Charles Bryant looks around the bar and sees Jacqueline Vandagriff? Ah, she looks like Caitlin.
It wouldn't surprise me if he actually mistook her at first. That saw her from behind and thought, man, my ex is here. I think in his mind that whole night, I think that's what he pictured.
After the murder, right after the murder, he took Jackie's phone and used it to add me on Facebook.
When Texas Ranger Jim Holland was brought in to interrogate Charles Bryant, the nature of the crime made him wonder if Bryant's brain was wired like the serial killers he'd encountered.
In what way is the mind of a serial killer different from common criminal?
Generally people like that tend to be sociopathic or psychopathic mindsets, and it's just a different game. Psychopath would be someone who's basically born with a scar on their brain. And a sociopathic mindset is something that society has brought on. Something happened to them that changed their psyche.
Something maybe had happened in his childhood.
Christy Dixon got a glimpse of Charles Bryant's psyche firsthand. She met him on a dating app the year before Jackie Vandagriff's death.
He seemed pretty quiet and reserved, almost like he was shy. By the second or third time that we were hanging out, I noticed he was getting pretty attached pretty quickly, and I just was not there. It was very casual to me.
After she broke things off, he continued to pursue her. Bryant even told her that he loved her. Christy says they'd never even shared a kiss.
It was a little too much too soon, too fast. I work with abused children, and that to me kind of stuck out.
Christy says that's when she asked Bryant about his childhood. He told her he had been molested, a claim that 48 Hours could not independently verify.
I remember thinking, that makes sense. I'm not a psychologist or anything, but his behavior sort of came off to me as maybe an abused child or someone who is just needing that extra love that most people probably aren't seeking.
Still, Christy thought he was harmless and stayed in touch.
I thought he was just a really nice guy and felt sorry for him.
I'm not an angry guy. I'm not aggressive.
As Ranger Holland continued his interrogation, he wanted to see if Bryant would answer the key question: how did Jackie Vandagriff die? Her autopsy didn't provide many answers.
There's a lot we didn't know. We didn't know where it occurred. We didn't know exactly how it broke down. And so that's what my goal was.
Holland wondered if the crime had a sexual element, but initially, Bryant denied anything sexual took place.
I don't recall having sex.
You don't?
No, normally I recall having sex.
After 3 more hours of interrogation, Bryant said they did have sex. Kinky sex. According to Bryant, Jackie wanted to be choked with an oversized zip tie that just happened to be in his car.
She didn't fight you in any way when you were putting it on?
The consensual sex aspect of it was one of those things that no, I felt strongly that he was lying about.
And Bryant also claimed that neither he nor Jackie had tightened the zip tie intentionally.
Okay. So you think he just tightened up on its own, basically?
Not so much that, like, it had a snag on something or...
Okay. Then what happened?
I'm trying to remember. Yeah, she's not responsive. Shake her. Nothing.
Are you just thinking this is a complete and total lie?
Yeah, it's total fabrication. Did he kill her? Yes, absolutely. When you deal with these people, it's so rare that you would sit down with them and they would just tell you A to Z, this is what occurred. And they're always going to leave out things that make them look really bad. In other words, there's an excuse. I'm not a bad person. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was an accident.
Although Bryant was evasive about how Jackie died, as Holland led him through the memory exercise, Bryant went into gruesome detail about how he disposed of her body.
Okay, what do you see in the pool?
Garbage bags.
All right, now tell me exactly what you see occurring after that.
I go down that trail.
And what happens next?
Set it on fire.
The fire. Why do you burn the body?
Spirit evidence.
Even if he couldn't admit to murder, Bryant seemed to waver between denial and acceptance, at one point conceding that the evidence showed he had to have done it.
I can't fight it. It's obviously me.
After an intense 6-hour interrogation and with mounting evidence, Charles Bryant was finally charged with Jackie Vandagriff's murder. Christy Dixon could not believe the news.
That night, I actually was scared to go to sleep. I had nightmares. He had never threatened me before, but just the fact that someone that I felt that I knew had murdered someone potentially, I was terrified.
For Caitlin Mathis, her worst fears were confirmed. And when she tried to learn more about the woman Bryant killed, she made a shocking discovery on Facebook.
I looked up Jackie Vandagriff and I realized, oh my God, I'm already friends with her.
Caitlin says that digital friendship began after Jackie's death.
You got a friend request from Jackie Vandagriff.
Yes.
Caitlin believes that Facebook friend request could only have come from one person, Charles Bryant.
That really sounds diabolical.
It was.
Bryant pleaded not guilty to Jackie's murder. His defense was the same story he told Ranger Holland.
These two young people met. They consumed a lot of alcohol. Our position is they had sex, kinky sex albeit, and she died.
Bryant's court-appointed defense attorney, Glynis McGinty, says Jackie Vandagriff's death was a tragic accident.
Are you telling me there's no evidence that Charles Bryant killed Jackie Vandagriff?
Not direct evidence.
Prosecutors Lucas Allen and Anna Hernandez believed the evidence they did have would be enough. But they also knew that most jurors want a motive, and they weren't sure they'd be able to tell this jury why they thought Jackie was targeted.
You have to wonder what is driving this person to do something like that.
In your minds, there is no doubt that the murder of Jackie Vandagriff is connected to the stalking of Caitlin Mathis.
Yes, I think we believe that, definitely. She might have just been victim number one, with Caitlin being victim number two.
To help prove this, the prosecution was hoping the judge would allow Caitlin to testify against her ex-boyfriend turned stalker in open court.
I felt sick.
Jackie was the most special person. I know I'll never meet someone like her again.
In April 2018, a year and a half after Jackie Vandagriff's untimely death, Charles Bryant was standing trial for her murder. Her friend Jackie Tan could not bring herself to be there.
I wanted to go, but I'm going to be honest. I couldn't look at him.
Charles Bryant would have to answer for a long list of items the prosecution had collected, including that giant zip tie, the shovel he purchased the night Jackie died, and that large knife which police believe he used to cut up her body, all found at his house.
This is something that you pray every night does not happen to your child when they go off to school.
Investigators had also found a stun gun in his car with Jackie's DNA on it. But it appears Jackie was spared at least one horror. Prosecutors Anna Hernandez and Lucas Allen say the medical examiner was able to run tests on Jackie's remains and found no evidence of sexual assault.
There was zero evidence to support that they had any type of sexual encounter.
Prosecutors say this undermines Bryant's story that this was kinky sex gone wrong. His attorney, Glynis McGinty.
How could they have had sex if there's no evidence?
No evidence to the degree of no sperm found in her. That doesn't mean they didn't have some type of consensual sexual encounter.
She likes it when we're making out.
Prosecutors chose not to play that interrogation tape for the jury, which meant Bryant would have to take the stand if he wanted jurors to hear his version of events. He elected not to.
Shouldn't he be explaining to the jury why he's not at fault for her death?
And then that flies in the face of our constitutional rights.
But the defense knows it has an uphill battle to convince a jury that Brian is not guilty of murder while admitting he disposed of Jackie's body.
If he says it was just an accident, why didn't he call for help?
Sure, fair question. Intoxicated, panicked, and his mind would not process all of that to make a rational decision that you or I would have made, call the police.
But Bryant went further than simply discarding Jackie's body. Much, much further. And prosecutors wanted the jury to hear their theory.
A huge piece of that story was the stalking.
But before the jury could hear from Caitlin, the judge would have to rule on whether or not to allow this evidence.
How is he as a boyfriend?
Local TV cameras were there when, without the jury present, Caitlin took the stand and faced her ex.
I was disgusted just to see his face.
Did he look at you? Did you meet eyes?
At one point we had to, when they made me describe to the court what he was wearing. And he just had this smirk on his face.
There's nothing really that can prepare you for that, is there?
No. The second I walked out those doors, I started bawling.
In the end, the judge ruled against Caitlin being able to tell her story to the jury.
It was definitely a real blow to us.
That was the right decision.
Why?
He had not been convicted of anything with Caitlin.
As the jury went out to deliberate, the defense was hopeful.
I don't believe that they could prove that he murdered her. I don't think that they proved that.
But would the jury agree? They were out for a little over 2 hours, and even without hearing Caitlin's story,
We, the jury, find the defendant, Charles Dean Bryant, Jr., guilty of the offense of murder.
Charles Bryant was found guilty of Jackie Vandagriff's murder and dismemberment.
To your way of thinking, was justice done?
Yes.
I knew she was up there and said, "Thank you."
Because prosecutors had no evidence Bryant committed another crime at the same time as Jackie's murder, like rape or kidnapping, he was not eligible for the death penalty. He was sentenced to life.
As terrible as it is to say, but I wanted the death penalty.
Under Texas law, Bryant could be eligible for parole after 30 years. Caitlin says she feels like she's still looking over her shoulder and always will be.
I fear that when he gets out, he'll come and find me and do something to either me or someone that I love. That's my biggest fear.
Ever since this happened, Caitlin and her mother have been thinking about Jackie and her family.
This whole time I wanted to reach out, but I didn't know how they felt.
Nearly 2 years after Jackie died, they finally met.
Her grandmother, bless her heart, she immediately came up to us and to Caitlin and hugged her and said, "I've been so worried about you these past 2 years."
Wow. Karen, why is this the part that gets you?
He took away their little girl. And the pain I saw in their eyes. I could feel their pain.
And yet the grandmother was telling Caitlin she was worried about Caitlin.
Yes,
You sound like very special people.
they are.
Caitlin says she's struggled with the fact that she survived and Jackie did not.
This so easily could have been you.
And some days I wish it was. It's just the guilt that eats me up sometimes. I would have easily taken her place if I had the chance.
"48 Hours. Don't miss an episode."
Thank you.